We are looking forward to design more studies that investigate how this drug can play a role in porcine anesthesia and analgesia. We're just looking forward to advance knowledge and know more about these animals.
Welcome to The Last Word, the official ALAS podcast dedicated to connecting and informing the laboratory animal science community. Each episode takes a closer look at recent articles published in our journals, JLAS and LAS Pro, and features interviews with professionals advancing the field. I'm Jennifer Smith, your host. As a laboratory animal veterinarian and the Director of Education and Scientific Affairs at ALAS, I look forward to sharing these conversations with you. Let's discover something new together. All right. Well, thank you for joining us again today. I have a wonderful guest and a new friend and kindred spirit. I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Chiara Hampton. Currently, Chiara is serving as an assistant professor of anesthesiology at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, the veterinary school. She has an amazing history, and I'm going to let her go ahead and explain that to all of you because she comes to us as a diplomate of the American College of Veterinary Anesthesia and Analgesia. So it's just going to be awesome to talk with her about that. She has recently published a paper in our journal JLAS titled Effect of 2 Constant Rate Infusions of Lidocaine on the Anesthetic Requirements of Isoflurane in Pigs. So Chiara, welcome. Please go ahead. Tell us about yourself, how you got interested in being an anesthesiologist, what you're doing now, and specifically why you took on this important topic.
Dr. Smith, thank you for this introduction. It's really lovely being here and being hosted for this podcast today. This is a very special invitation for me because any day that I spend talking about porcine anesthesia is a great day. This is what I love to do. So I completed my training in Italy, my home country. And then after an internship in small animal orthopedics, which we don't talk about, I realized that I really, truly enjoyed my time in the operating room, but not because of the surgery in itself, but because of my, fascination with the anesthetic process and the monitoring. It's like working on a ever-moving physiologic puzzle that changes and responds to our medical choices, and is just very fascinating. So I moved to the States for my residency at Oregon State. I worked in practice for 4 years, but that just didn't suit me. So when I became a resident, I got introduced to porcine clinical patients, but also to some translational models that we had at OSU for some contract jobs that we did with some other PIs out of the Portland area. And the first study that I did with them was investigating the use of a specific device to monitor blood glucose for diabetes patients. And so I got to be the anesthetist for 2 Yucatan pigs for about a dozen times each, and I was just hooked. That's all I wanted to do after that. So precisely on that project, we started incorporating a lidocaine constant rate infusion, which we'll just abbreviate as CRI from now on, just to provide inhalant anesthetic sparing and some analgesia. This was an idea that stemmed from the literature. We have a lot of literature about the use of lidocaine CRIs in other species, and we said, why not? But then we looked at the literature, and there was absolutely nothing on swine. And so we decided to design a study that would investigate the sparing effect of lidocaine on the anesthetic requirement of isoflurane, and kind of on a secondary objective, just the hemodynamic effects of the 2 CRIs. Since this project, much of my primary author career has been focused on the hunt for drugs, techniques, and processes that may make pig less difficult anesthetic patients. I'm sure the audience and the people that work with them know that they're not the friendliest anesthetic patient, but also to improve their welfare and just to bring the level of care to kind of a more of a modern age, because we are kind of behind, I would say about 20 years behind compared to our practices in dogs and cats and other companion animals. So that's kind of the focus of my career.
That is amazing. I love hearing that. And wow, we are so glad that you came over to our side as well and are just using all your skills and talents, not only for the pigs, but also just for lab animal in general. We think this is just amazing. And when I saw this paper, we're going to talk about this in a little bit in your introduction, but like you, I was so surprised that somebody hadn't done this already. And so I think it highlights really well what you just said. Like, we're sort of behind with the pigs, and they are a really important laboratory animal species. So we're so glad that you're here and that you're so dedicated to doing this. So like all projects, you need a team. So we would love for you to introduce the team who worked on this paper and sort of who did what and why.
Oh, absolutely. This is a special team for me. So I did this project when I was still a resident at Oregon State. And so you'll see Dr. Thomas Riebold and Dr. Ron Mansager. They were my residency and research mentors. And so they are obviously a crucial component of this paper, this study. They had a crucial role in the design of the study at the time. I just did not have many research projects under my belt. And so I just enjoyed seeing them guiding me through all the hoops of ordering the animals and designing everything and making sure I had all the drugs and monitors that I needed. They also helped me with the live portion of the study because, as we will mention when we describe our materials and methods, this type of induction requires physical restraint, and we are working with pretty powerful and strong animals to restrain physically. So that was a lot of fun, as I'm sure many of us know.
Sure.
There's also some degree of instrumentation. We had several catheters for sampling and administration of fluids. So that was also very instructional for me. That's kind of something that is one of my skills now. And I feel like this project has helped me building those skills of catheterization, which in pigs is not the easiest of the skills to perform for sure. And then finally, Dr. Klein, she's been instrumental in the writing of this manuscript. I kind of had let it sit because of, life happens, and I just didn't really spend a lot of time wanting to work on this project after I became a faculty member. So she helped me putting this together again and writing it, and she was incredibly helpful.
Oh, that's great. We all need somebody like that in our life, right?
Absolutely.
Keep pushing the science forward when life gets sometimes a little bit overwhelming. So I'm so glad that she did. That's great. All right. Well, let's just jump right into it. Let's see. So the introduction, we always try to ask questions about the introduction because our authors in JLAS tend to do just an exceptional job of really summarizing what the current literature is, what is the problem, if there is one, or what is the hole that's there, and how can we learn more? And the one thing we always like to ask is, what salient points from the introduction would you share? And then, of course, we always want to know what the hypothesis was.
Well, pigs are a growing population of clinical patients, but also a population of translational large animal models in the research community. Inhalants are the backbone of large animal anesthesia for medium to long anesthetic procedure, and most certainly in the research setting. Isoflurane is probably the most used inhalant in the lab animal setting, so this was kind of a natural choice. Lidocaine is an old drug. Anesthetists have been working with it since 1942, and it's been an integral component of human and veterinary anesthetic protocols, not only as a local anesthetic, but also as a systemic agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we know about the ability of lidocaine to spare, so to reduce other anesthetic agents, especially inhalants, in many other species. We have goats, we have information on calves, foals, horses, dogs, cats, and the pig simply was missing. We also knew that the sparing effect of lidocaine is dose dependent. And so which dose would you use clinically on a pig to produce what kind of sparing effect on your isoflurane expired concentration? We didn't know. And so we tested two doses. One was 50 microgram per kg per minute, pretty standard dose that we use in the clinical floor. And then a super maximal dose, which was about 200 microgram per kilogram per minute. We finally were interested also in learning what plasma concentrations corresponded to that sparing effect. We also looked at the metabolite. Lidocaine has two metabolites that are active. One is, we're going to abbreviate them because I'm incapable of pronouncing their names. But
me too.
One, we're going to call it GX, and the other one, we're going to call it MAGX. So of the two, the one that in people has the most analgesic effect and just its active form is going to be the MAGX. And so that's the one that we decided to measure. because we kind of wanted to put together some of the pharmacodynamic and then pharmacokinetic together to see what we were dealing with. So the tested null hypothesis that we analyzed was that isoflurane requirements in commercial pigs would be unaffected by two concentrated infusion, we call them CRI. One was 50 microgram per kg per minute, and the other one was 200 when administered intravenously.
Wow, that's great. And I so appreciate, again, that background and that just kind of really great introduction to this project. And I still am surprised that, that some of this wasn't done already. So I'm just so thankful that you guys took this on. So moving on to study design and materials and methods, there's always some interesting backstory here. So we would love to know, you did a great job already kind of talking about your study and some of the design. And our listeners probably would love to know more about the type of pigs that you used, if there were some challenges there, what sexes. And then our listeners always love to know anything about, specialized equipment or anything that would help them to perhaps do something similar.
Yeah. So the pigs we included in the study were 6 healthy commercial breeds. We had 3 Yorkshire, 2 Durocs, and 1 Berkshire, which, by the way, is my favorite breed of pigs.
Okay, good to know.
And we acquired them from a local farm. They were healthy, but they weren't obviously at the GLP level or anything like that. We anesthetized them on 2 separate anesthetic episodes, and that was kind of to build this classic crossover design where we administer 2 treatments in 2 separate episodes. Classically, we separate those episodes by making sure that we have enough washout time between those 2 episodes. And the reason is sometimes when we administer a drug, we can have accumulation or what we call a carryover effect on the second anesthetic episode. And so as a conventional rule, we usually use 10 times the half-life of that drug in that species. And so we looked at the literature. There was a paper that had a specific elimination half-life that had been published in swine. And so we multiplied it by 10 and made it convenient to us. So we decided it was going to be a couple of days, but we just felt like the paper was going to be stronger if we had a little bit more time built in. And so we just had a 6-day washout.
Sure.
But you do want those 10 elimination half-lives being present and built into a study design that is similar to this. We also, in this type of studies, were interested in a precise determination of the expired concentration of the anesthetic agent. And so one of the key elements, like you were mentioning in terms of the equipment, we need to have a monitor that has a gas analyzer that is precise and also that is calibrated daily with a specific calibration gas to make sure that you can purchase. And this is done to obtain the most accurate results during data collection. And some of the papers that don't see, the light of day is because this calibration has not been done. And so we can't guarantee that the numbers that are displayed on the screen are actually what's present right now in the expired concentration of and the gases of that one patient.
It's time for a quick break to hear about the ALAS Learning Library. Hey, are you ready to elevate your team's knowledge and skills in laboratory animal science? Well, the ALAS Learning Library is your one-stop solution for comprehensive training. With courses designed for everyone, you can train your entire team in one place, earn valuable ALAS CEUs and RACE CE credits, and take advantage of group discounts to maximize that investment. Getting started is easy too. Sign up for free to access select courses instantly to explore a vast library of resources. Empower your team, stay ahead of the field, and grow with the ALAS Learning Library, your trusted resource for laboratory animal science professionals.
For anesthetic requirement studies, we can only use the agent that we are studying. So we need that agent to be the one that we use for induction and maintenance, because we know that injectable anesthetics and sedatives spare the volatile anesthetics. So we can't allow that to enter our study design and confound our variables. And so we had to mask down the pigs with isoflurane. We intubated them and then we maintained them on isoflurane at a target expired concentration. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later when we talk about the bracketing technique. For the measurements of isoflurane requirements, we use this technique, which is classically used in animal studies for MAC determination. MAC is defined, it's a minimum alveolar concentration, and it's defined as the end-tidal concentration of a volatile anesthetic agent at barometric pressure of 1 atmosphere that produces immobility in 50% of a population that is exposed to a supermaximal noxious stimulus. In our case, the noxious stimulus that we use on our pigs was a claw clamping technique at the coronary band, and that was done with the same clamp at the same ratchet. We tried to standardize that as much as we could. And so in response to this noxious stimulus, we're expecting either no movement, which means that we are over the threshold that is needed for that 50% to be identified, or we're expecting motion of the leg, so a motor response of the claw that has been clamped. In addition, in pigs, they're a little peculiar in this. We also need a purposeful movement to be present. So we not only needed the leg to move, but also another part of the body. That could have been the head, another leg, the tail. It didn't really matter, but that in pigs, purposeful movement is really needed for us to define this anesthetic requirement. And so this is what we were looking for. Now, every time you don't get a response, you will decrease your vaporizer setting by about 10%. And you kind of reproduce and continue making these motions and these reductions until you have a positive response to that stimulus. And then when you have those two numbers, so your last negative and your first positive, you will arithmetically average them. And that is your anesthetic requirement for that one individual. If you have a large population, obviously you can make assumptions that many individuals have a little bit of inter-individual variation, but at the same time, MACs don't vary too much across individuals or species. But obviously there are exceptions. And in this case, pigs are an exception. Their MACs are historically higher pretty much across the board with all inhalants agents. And so we just wanted to see what lidocaine would do to this anesthetic requirement. We lastly collected the cardiovascular parameters, but also some blood samples from the arterial catheters that we had placed to measure the plasma concentrations of lidocaine and MAGX at the two negative and positive response times, kind of to see what does this PD effect correspond to in terms of PK. And so we just wanted to have an idea of what that was.
Oh, thank you so much for all of that. That was like a master class, by the way, and how to design and set up a study, especially anybody that is dealing with pharmacological agents. So thank you for all of that. That was absolutely fantastic. All right. So with all that said, let's talk about your results. What did you find? Anything surprising?
Well, we're dealing with pigs, so everything is surprising and everything is a curveball. So
Sure.
So first of all, we had 6 pigs that entered the study. One of them unfortunately passed away due to a non-anesthetic related death. And so our stats was done on 5 subjects that have received the CRI 50 and 6 that had received the CRI 200. So theoretically, 11 animals were analyzed. The combined isoflurane requirement for the 2 treatment groups was very in line with what has been published in the literature. So we had an anesthetic requirement of about 1.7%, which is very, very similar to what's out there. The sparing effect at 50 microgram per kg per minute was 7.8%, pretty grim. And with the 200, it was 13.4%. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the discussion section, but I guess we weren't expecting these sparing effects to be so low, even in the single digit.
Sure.
It's not something that has been reported in the literature before with other species, so it's kind of out of the ordinary. We didn't find any difference between the CRI 50 and the CRI 200 in terms of sparing, so the 8% and the 13% were not significantly different, which was expected looking at the numbers, but it definitely helps us in making a decision about the dose that we're going to be incorporating in our anesthetic episode. And so that's something that was helpful for us to see. The cardiovascular parameters were clinically stable. When I say stable, that didn't mean that they were perfect. Some of them were kind of teetering in the hypotensive place that I didn't really enjoy seeing. But I mean, we have to think about this. We are
Yes.
overdosing them with inhalant on purpose to find the correct anesthetic plane for them. So it's natural that hypotension is going to be a part of the game here. And that's something that was expected and kind of made us work for it. But the only intervention that we had built in was just a fluid management, because if we had intervened with dobutamine or any other pressor, we would have affected our cardiovascular parameters. And so we wanted to interfere with that the least possible. We did find a strong correlation between the anesthetic requirement reduction and the MAGX, more so than with the lidocaine concentration. And this correlation was very strong with the CRI 50, both at the positive and negative time point, but this correlation was completely lost when we use a CRI 200. And so this is another piece of the puzzle that is going to help us deciding what kind of dose we're going to be using clinically. The time of extubation, honestly, this was unexpected for me. I thought that the pigs that had received the 200 would wake up and recover from anesthesia in a significantly longer time, and they didn't. They also weren't particularly ataxic. I remember we only had one that was under for a very long time because it was difficult to determine anesthetic requirement on. And he just was ataxic for about 40 minutes to an hour, but nothing that would require any type of intervention or concern. And he just kind of wrote it off and he was fine after that. That's kind of the gist of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of information there. And like you said, some of that was kind of surprising, as I recall reading it and thinking, wow, that is kind of surprising. Yeah, so let's talk about your discussion, because I think you unpacked some of that. And we always love to know if there were any study limitations that you identified that you want to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. So I think there's two main points here to discuss. The first one is obviously the poor sparing performance of lidocaine on isoflurane in pigs. In other species, as I mentioned before, we do have higher sparing effects at comparable dosages. So we have a 17% in cats, 20% in goats, up to 59% in cats, depending on the dosage that is used, and up to 49% in horses, especially when you combine lidocaine with like a ketamine CRI, for example. In particular, is of interest a study that was done in dogs that had used the same exact dosages that we employed, and they had a 19% sparing for the 50 and a 43% sparing for the 200. Yes. So what is happening here?
Yeah,
and so
that is very interesting. I also recall working on a project, a while ago and trying to really understand sort of that cardioprotected nature of lidocaine in some of these protocols. And I wondered if that was anything that you guys were able to look at.
We weren't able to look at that. I think that studying these type of effects requires a lot of very specialized equipment and just ECG monitoring systems that we just didn't really have, and it was kind of out of the scope of the project. But it definitely would be something interesting to do in the future. We do have some information on other species that we could use to design a study with. For sure. So we saw this ceiling effect. We call it ceiling effect because no matter how much we increase the dose, the effect doesn't increase in magnitude, right? And so that obviously didn't happen in dogs, and it happened to us. And so we just didn't really have a good answer until we looked at the PK data. So, which brings me to the second point is our plasma concentrations were 9 to 10 times lower than what they have seen in those same dogs that I talked about earlier that had exactly the same CRIs dosages, so 50 and 200 again. And so we honestly don't know the reason for this finding, but from a pharmacokinetic standpoint, it certainly explains our low sparing percentages. We can't have a sparing effect that is efficient if our plasma concentrations don't reach minimum effective concentrations. We know that analgesia from lidocaine reached at about 1.5 to 5 microgram per ml of blood, and we were at a max of 0.4. So we are way below that threshold of efficacy. And so that's something that definitely, from a PK standpoint, explains why our PD findings were so low in sparing.
That is a really good point, and I think a good correlation putting those together. That's very helpful. What about any maybe limitations to the study that you identified?
Yeah, definitely we had a very low number of subjects that we included. As usual, the PK studies are historically done with 5 to 6 individuals, 8 max. And so we were okay with that portion of the study. But definitely the PD, we could have used a higher number of subjects. We did do a post-hoc power analysis, and we had a power about 65% and for our hemodynamic data. But the other limitation would be the fact that the anesthetic requirements were performed in duplicate and not in triplicate as conventionally done in MAC study. Otherwise, the title of this paper would have been on MAC, right?
Sure.
And so we did that because we wanted it to be a little bit more clinically applicable. No one is going to be on a CRI for 10 hours, and a MAC study takes so long. So we wanted to kind of make it clinically applicable to us and to the clinic floor. And so we had a 30-minute equilibration time that was followed by 150 minutes, I think was the average time that they were anesthetized. So that makes it a little bit more relatable to what we do every day. And that was one of our goals.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. Well, we are almost out of time. I'm sad. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm glad that we're not that far apart, so I can still come over and anesthetize pigs. So if you're looking for me, that's where I'm going to be.
I would love that.
Okay, but I do have one more final question. We ask this of everyone. So we would love to know, what advice would you give somebody? So knowing that you've done this study and all your amazing experiences, we'd love to know what advice you'd give to someone who is maybe anesthetizing pigs for the first time. They know enough to know they want to include kind of this multimodal approach to not only just pain we think of, but also for, MAC sparing of their inhalant or opiate sparing or whatever. What advice would you give them, especially if they kind of want to use lidocaine, but they're not sure? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend the incorporation of lidocaine in an anesthetic protocol in which lidocaine is indicated and obviously not contraindicated. My recommendation from this study would be to use the 50 microgram per kg per minute dosage, since there seemed to be no advantage in using the 200. So 50 is actually what I've been using for the past 8 years on research and clinical swine based on this data. And I want to say, although there isn't a clinically significant MAC sparing from lidocaine alone in pigs, we still don't know if in conjunction with other CRIs, if the MAC sparing and anesthetic requirement sparing would be greater, and if there's a benefit in doing so. So that's something that it's open to investigation, and I hope that somebody looks into this in the future. Lidocaine is safe, is cheap, and it's readily available to virtually all practices. And we are looking forward to design more studies that investigate how this drug can play a role in porcine anesthesia and analgesia. We're just looking forward to advance knowledge and know more about these animals, because we are a little bit behind.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That is such a great summary. We appreciate so much you being here today, Chiara, and I am just so glad to have met you this way and know that we will hopefully see lots more from you. And I know that you also have a really special connection with other veterinary anesthesiologists who are really interested in either crossing over to lab animal, which we would love, or at least working with us. And I wondered if there was anything else you wanted to share on getting that partnership going.
Yeah, if I may, Jennifer, I wanted to give the audience a sneak peek on a very exciting news, which is the recent creation of the Research Animal Anesthesia Network, abbreviated as RAAN. This is a network of veterinary anesthetists and anesthesiologists that was formed to promote and support the involvement of these specialists in experimental research involving animals. We are trying to foster collaboration between experienced lab animal anesthetists and scientists requiring assistance or advice in animal anesthesia and analgesia, host a discussion forum, a mailing list, and kind of build this community of vets that are interested in experimental refinement through anesthesia and analgesia and possibly facilitating multi-center research. It's very exciting.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's so exciting to us as well. ALAS, we're here for it. We're excited to partner and assist in any way. That is just absolutely fantastic. And I think as this paper shows really well, it's well overdue. So thank you again for all your efforts in that and your other veterinary anesthesia friends who are interested. We're excited about that. All right. Well, our time is up for today. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for this time. Thank you for the ease of conversation and how lovely you are and just so joyful. And it's so refreshing to see that anesthesia is getting more attention in the lab animal field.
Yeah, we love it. Thank you. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Last Word. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to leave your feedback in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more great content. We encourage you to submit your research manuscripts to our journals, JLAS and LAS Pro. We're always looking to feature impactful studies. You can also connect with us on our social media channels or email us directly at info@alas.org. We appreciate your listening today, and we'll see you next time on The Last Word, an ALAS podcast. Until then, stay curious and stay connected.